Hi folks, I'm Kevin Daly, Opinion Editor, joined as ever by our benevolent leader, spreader of the wealth, Aidan Ryan, and for the first time in Griffin history, we are joined by our wonderful, what's your title? Your ad director?
Something like that.
Our wonderful ad director, Kristen Warner. Kristen will be leaving us next semester for the magic that awaits her in Disney World. Indeed, we're all shedding a tear at her departure. Surely the Griffin office will be a better place without her 90s throwbacks and incessantly loud voice. Wherever you are, underneath the Richard E. Winter Class of 1942 Student Center, you're bound to know where this girl is, just by virtue of her bellicose Italian voice. I don't even know if she is Italian, I just said so. But at any rate, I think we should get into the substance of today's banger.
Yeah. Today's front page story is actually by a new writer, Michael J. Hockwater, who's looking at in the series retention. Obviously, that has been one of the most bandied about words on campus really all semester, and he's taking a close look at it for the first time in our pages.
Kristen, you spent last year as a resident assistant in one of the freshman residence halls, isn't that right?
Yes, in Bosch.
Could you tell us a little bit about that experience and how it relates specifically to the retention issue?
Well, my freshman year I lived in Bosch as well, and I went through 2 roommates that moved out, and right away we got replaced. Well, last year, some of my girls, when I was an RA, their roommate moved out, and some of them never got a new roommate because no one was there. And we even had some study rooms that were made just because they had no one to fill the rooms. They made a floor study room on top of the common rooms. They had 2 places to go to study.
Wow.
Yes, I recently talked to Matt Melville, Director of Residence Life, and while he said all of our open buildings are close to capacity and may actually reach capacity once the snowbound operation starts in second semester, that's true enough, but we have closed down the entire bottom floor of all the Humboldt buildings. I believe Humboldt D and E buildings. Main Delavan is gone. Griffin is totally empty. Desmond is empty. So we're definitely shrinking now.
And a lot of these buildings have been empty for a couple of years. Now we'll be looking for a report issued by a retention task force that was assembled by President Hurley and led by, among other people, Dr. Terry Mangione, who's our Student Affairs VP. That report, as you'll read tomorrow, is being issued tomorrow, which is November the 15th. The Griffin is hoping to obtain a copy of that progress report. If we don't, we expect fully to sit down with Dr. Mangione and parse out some of the particulars of that report. But this is, we've mentioned, been an ongoing issue. President Hurley gave the retention issue a prominent shout-out during his convocation address back in September, and he cites it as one of the leading challenges to Canisius' long-term viability.
As of last spring, a retention task force, as Kevin said, headed by Dr. Mangione and Dr. Peg McCarthy from Academic Affairs, has been working on the situation and also overseeing 6 different subcommittees. Only one student sits on one of the subcommittees, and of course that's one of our best and brightest, Anthony Croze, on the Student Engagement Committee. And actually, they have been taking some concrete steps, aside from composing this report, to combat retention. The first is actually this Saturday. We will have a volleyball game hosted by President John Hurley. He'll be slinging pizza, throwing out some T-shirts, and this is targeted specifically at freshmen and people who might have transferred.
You know, I worry sometimes about student representation. We've written about it, for example, with regard to the budget committee issue in this paper. I also feel, and it's understandable, but still perhaps objectionable, that the administration tends to rely on the Undergraduate Student Association to represent students. Now, of course, this is one of its most basic and important charges, but oftentimes I feel that it would behoove the administration to reach beyond the strict parameters of the Undergraduate Student Association. Also, there's a former Canisius administrator who since made his way to the University of South Florida, I believe, isn't that correct?
Yes.
He put together an assessment review based on logistical regress that saw in the mid-1990s a retention rate that was as high as 94%, and he offered a number of really intriguing comments to the Griffin for the front page story.
Yes, this is Dr. Tom Miller, who, along with Dr. Paul Sauer and Dr. Joe Glynn and a few others, developed this model. And of course, if you have a model to identify students at risk of leaving, you also need a mechanism to prevent them then and after identifying them. And actually, another step that we've taken so far, 2 of our esteemed doctors, our beloved Dr. E. Roger Stevenson and his wife, Dr. Betsy Delabovi, have taken over English 100, formerly farmed out to adjuncts or junior faculty. These senior faculty members are taking these students at risk of leaving, some students with English deficiencies, and just immersing them in Canisius culture. So there'll be another report on that by Michael J. Hawkwater coming up soon in the coming weeks.
You know, if I could jump in just really quickly before we move on to our next segment, what arouses my curiosity is why exactly this retention model was abandoned. Because at some point, and we're not sure when it happened, we're not sure under whose stewardship it occurred under, and we're not sure why it happened. But this very successful model for retention was abandoned. Perhaps it was no longer suitable for the times. Perhaps it had to do with the changing of the guard when Father Cook left the presidency and President Hurley took over.
I think it disappeared somewhere under Chadwick's tenure as
Is that right?
academic VP, but again, asked questions of several parties, and neither Dr. McCarthy nor Dr. Mangione knows when this disappeared.
Well, as Aiden says, we're going to keep covering this retention story. It's absolutely pivotal to our student culture, and look for more reports from our crack investigative reporter, Michael Hawkwater.
We're joined this evening by Elizaveta Rushinova. Sitting here at the table with us, she is our new foreign correspondent and columnist on all matters
Slavic.
and worldly, cultural, etc., etc. You saw her column last week, The Foreign Exchange. Expect that regularly. So, Elizaveta, tell us a little bit about what you want to touch on in the coming weeks.
I think that this week I want to discuss, I'm sorry for my mistakes, grammatical mistakes. I want to discuss about differences between American boys and Russian boys. I actually was thinking to talk about differences in cultural differences, but it is really very interesting topic, and I think that especially girls and will be interested in it, and maybe some boys will recognize themselves in my descriptions. Hopefully.
So, if we may, who has the better half of that argument? Is the American boy and the prototypical Russian boy necessarily comparable? Is one preferable?
I think that if you compare a Russian boy and American boy, you will find some disadvantages in both of them, and also you'll find some advantages. So it's just like it is very difficult to answer this question straightly.
So is this necessarily a cultural issue, or is it that all men just generally are inadequate? Because that's the thesis I'm willing to run with.
It's just like it is already right now not comparing, I suppose, American and Russian boys, and it is already comparing women and men in the whole. Well, I think that boys, in general, they all have something similar, but culture makes something specific, I think. For example, American boys, I can say that they are more sportsmen, and they also less
Certainly not our
confident.
experience.
No. And they are less confident, I suppose.
Interesting.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So do you think that after your column hits the newsstands tomorrow morning, the Russian exchange program from Canisius is just going to see a huge jump in female applicants, or?
No, I don't think so. But I think that in any case, it will be rather interesting as for boys and also as for girls to read this article, and maybe they will really recognize themselves in it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope so.
Certainly sounds interesting. So what do you think of it after this?
After this, I think that I will discuss how American people see themselves and European point of view on how American people judge themselves. And also later I will discuss, I will also continue comparing cultures, and I have some international friends, students who are living in Campion Hall, and I think that it will be interesting to also discuss not only Russian culture but also French culture, German culture, and Italian, and what people from Western Europe think about America.
Can I ask quickly, with regard to Campion Hall, it's 10:07 here, and we certainly want to get to the Griffin's a weekly, 10 p.m. ritual regarding the Crunch Time song. Do you think it's prudent that we place all of our international students, or most of our international students, in one building and kind of segregate them from the rest of the population?
I think that from the one point of view it is really a good idea, because international students can understand each other much quicker because they are living in Europe, they're living very, very close to each other, and by the way, they all the time traveling throughout the Europe. And I think that American culture is a little bit more different than, for example, if you compare American and German, you will feel like a little bit more gap than you will compare French people and German people. But I think that it would be better if all people in campaign, you will just take them and put, I don't know, throughout the campus that they will be able to live and to communicate with Americans, because I suppose that for Americans it will be really very interesting to communicate with French and with German, and right now they are really separated, they are living their own life separately from Americans. All the time when I'm talking with them they're saying, oh, we're going, like for example, all international students are going to the restaurant or somewhere else, and they don't spend time with Americans practically.
We understand the international students had quite the Halloween party several weeks ago.
Yes, but the problem is that I've spent this party with Americans. So.
Ah.
Okay.
Yes, because I'm living in Frischhall, I'm surrounded by Americans.
Mhm.
And therein lies the problem. Elizaveta, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thanks very
Thank
much.
you.